Second question. Who is coaching Texas next season?
I love this question. Marcus Nelson, our great editor, posed this question. I believe.
Best.
Marcus the GOAT, no doubt about it.
He's the GOAT.
We have a lot of great editors, but Marcus is our college basketball editor. Shout out to Marcus.
Yeah, I mean, you look up with Marcus, and he's publishing something, editing something, and publishing it at 8 a.m, and you look up and it's 2 a.m, and he's doing the same thing. That man works long, hard hours. We're lucky to have him.
He's wild. Yes, we are very fortunate to have Marcus. Shout out to Marcus. We love you. My response when Marcus posed this question was just a picture of John Calipari. And at the time, I'm like, LOL, wouldn't that be funny? And then I think you responded, and it's like, that would be kind of interesting. And you think about it a little bit more, and it's like, that was obviously the first one I thought of, because John Calipari, it's like every job that opens, he seems to be mentioned because every program wants John Calipari. At this point, it feels like Kentucky fans would pay for shipping, right? Like they're kind of sick of John Calipari. They're 10-4 this season, which is a disappointment. I think that relative to preseason expectations, kind of continues recent trend of not quite meeting expectations by UK fans. And they have lofty expectations, and I think that's very, very, very fair at the University of Kentucky, but lost to St. Peter's in the NCAA tournament. Haven't been to the Final Four since 2015. No Elite Eights since 2018. Their offense looks totally archaic. They have a ton of talent every year, and every year it just feels like they're not quite meeting the expectations. So maybe a refresh or restart could be what Kentucky and Calipari needs. So John Calipari to me is 1A on Texas's wish list. I don't know if he'd be coaching next season at Texas, but he's the one that I think Texas could potentially, like, the one big fish that actually could be realistic.
So I put together a list of Texas candidates last night. You can find it at cbssports.com. And on that list is John Calipari. And immediately from some people, it was like, yeah, but why would the Kentucky coach leave for Texas? And that's an easy thing to say in a vacuum, but we're not in a vacuum here. The context of the situation matters. By the way, there's a Kentucky coach named Tubby Smith who left for Minnesota.
Yeah.
For the exact same reasons, because it had become miserable and unbearable, because what you were doing for that school was no longer enough for the fan base. Don't ever forget, like, why would the Kentucky coach leave for Texas? More or less for the same reasons the Kentucky coach left for Minnesota. Because you reach a point, I think we can all agree there is no bigger and more intense fan base than the Kentucky fan base. There are other big and intense fan bases, Indiana, obviously, Kansas, North Carolina. I don't think there's a bigger and more intense fan base than the Kentucky fan base. And when things are going well, I mean, you're a god. There was a time I used to joke, like, because you could put these polls on Twitter, and it would be like, so what's the best home court advantage in America? And Rupp Arena would win it every year. By the way, Rupp Arena is not the best home court advantage in America. Rupp Arena is not the best place to see a college basketball game. But Rupp Arena would win that poll. Why? Because Kentucky fans would take it over. The joke I used to make is like, if you were to ask, put a poll up, who's the greatest Beatle of all time? Paul, John, George, Ringo, or John Calipari. John Calipari would win the poll if Kentucky fans got a hold of it. When you're doing well there, you got a whole army behind you. But when it starts to slip a little bit, or you're no longer doing what you used to do or meeting expectations, it gets real uncomfortable. And I think we've gotten to that place with John at Kentucky. It started, I don't know, you could trace it all the way back to not winning the national championship in 2015, even though they went to the Final Four with a 38-0 record and clearly had the best team in the country. And you can reasonably argue, and not definitively argue, but reasonably argue, if you just play the right people, you win the national championship, instead of trying to play so many people to keep so many people happy. So there's that. Then they haven't been back to the Final Four since 2015. 2 seasons ago, worst in modern Kentucky history, missed the NCAA tournament. Last season, lose to St. Peter's in the first round. This summer, get into a back and forth. I don't know if it's technically a back and forth, but certainly a spat on some level with the Kentucky football coach. And the Kentucky fans largely took the side of the Kentucky football coach. And then you start the season ranked number 1 at KenPom, and you're sitting here on January 6th. Oh, it's January 6th. Just realized it's January 6th. You sit here on January 6th, and you've got no good wins, and your team is undeniably underachieving relative to preseason expectations. Kentucky fans, I don't want to lump them all together, because there's you start with Kentucky fans, and then there's different groups of them, and I'm sure some of them still love and appreciate and adore John Calipari, but whatever that number used to be, it ain't the same anymore. And when John got into that. When the Kentucky football coach went at John this summer on Twitter, and largely Kentucky fans backed the football coach over the basketball coach, I got a phone call from one of John's close friends, and we were just talking about, can you believe this? And John was just trying to get to put some pressure on his athletic director to get a practice facility built, and now it's blown up on him. And this close friend of John said to me, the truth is he should have. And the guy was like, I'm not trying to be, Monday morning quarterback here, because I don't know that I told John then you got to do this. But looking back at it, this person said John should have taken the UCLA job when they fired Steve Alford. He could have been the UCLA coach instead of Mick Cronin. Yeah. And he passed for understandable reasons at the time. But looking back on it, this friend of his said he should have gone. And literally nothing from this summer has changed for the better for John Calipari, other than maybe he's got an incredible recruiting class on the way. But even that, I gather some Kentucky fans are just like shrugging their shoulders, like, oh, we got another great recruiting class on the way. Yeah, every year we got that. And we still got one national championship, haven't been to the Final Four since 2015. Yeah. So I'm not predicting John Calipari is going to be the next head coach at Texas. What I am guaranteeing you is that he would consider it. And I think seriously consider it, because what history tells us is once you lose the fan base, like once they don't believe in you anymore, it becomes very difficult to win them back over. Like, Tom Crean got there at Indiana. Fans turned on him, and then he won a Big Ten title outright. And it was like, okay, but then the next season, some injuries went the wrong way, boom, fired. It's over. And I don't think John is at risk of being fired, because firing John Calipari would cost Kentucky a lot of money. But your quality of life does matter. And if you are, and some coaches can live in a bubble, but boy, it's hard to do that at Kentucky and not be aware of the criticism and not even bump into it all of the time. And that doesn't only become hard on you, it gets hard for your family. And I think there's a scenario where if this Kentucky team continues to underachieve and loses in the second round of the NCAA tournament, or let's just throw it out there, maybe misses the NCAA tournament. I'm not predicting that, but it's certainly on the table at this point. It's not impossible to imagine. Then for the same reason Shaka Smart left Texas, I could see John Calipari going to Texas because it would give him a fresh set of expectations, a fan base that can see the good as opposed to obsessed with the bad.
Yeah.
And Texas could match him dollar for dollar. Like how many places could pay John Calipari what he makes at Kentucky? I don't know, but Texas can if they want to. So I do think he's a realistic candidate, more realistic for this Texas job if they want him than he's ever been for any other job since he took the Kentucky job. Also on the list of candidates, I put Chris Holtmann. Not because I think necessarily Texas is a better job than Ohio State. I actually think they're pretty comparable jobs. Like, they're big schools and the most prominent schools in their states, and they've got unlimited resources. But football matters more at both places. Like, that's Texas, that's Ohio State. So I don't know which job is better, but I do think they're comparable. Maybe more talent in Texas might tip the scales towards Texas, but they're comparable jobs. But Chris Holtmann's great. If I were an Ohio State fan, I would just be happy he's my coach. But if I were to tweet that right now, somebody would quickly reply, hadn't made a Sweet 16 yet. When's he going to the Sweet 16? And, people draw these lines at different places. And if you don't meet them, it becomes a problem for you. But same type of deal. If Ohio State were to lose in the first round of the NCAA tournament and that narrative intensifies and extends, you could see Chris Holtmann maybe, if approached, saying, should I do this just to start fresh? I put Eric Musselman on the list and acknowledge that, when you've got a great job like the Arkansas job and you're doing well at it, that's not the type of guy who typically goes and leaves it. But, and I do think Arkansas is a great job, but I would probably rank Texas ahead of it. And then, my friend, our colleague Seth Davis made this point in a list he did for The Athletic that, where you live matters to some coaches. And I say this respectfully. Fayetteville, Arkansas is an amazing college town, but it is a college town. And Austin is an incredible, one of the great American cities. And so that could be something that, makes that possible move compelling. Like, not only do I get to go work at a big time university with unlimited resources and talent all around the state, but my family also gets to live in Austin as opposed to Fayetteville. So that's just something to think about. Coaches don't always make these decisions strictly about basketball. I know one coach, when the Mississippi State job opened, I think after they sort of pushed Rick Stansbury out there was a coach, I don't want to name him, but he interviewed for the job. And I think if he wanted the job, it was his job. And he called me because he knows I live in Mississippi. And he said, talk to me about Starkville, Mississippi. And we were talking through it. And he was like, this coach, at the end of the conversation, he said, I just don't think I can raise my family in Starkville, Mississippi. I just don't think I want to. No, like, I have nothing against Mississippi or Mississippi State, but I just don't know if that's the place I want to raise my family in Starkville, Mississippi. And he literally, if he didn't actually turned down the job, he passed on the opportunity to be offered the job because he didn't want to live in that place. And so these are the types of things that factor in sometimes. Also on the list, Royal Ivey, former Texas player, Brooklyn Nets assistant. He was endorsed by Kevin Durant when the job opened last time, interviewed for the job. Obviously, when you consider hiring somebody who's literally never worked on a college campus, you're open yourself up to some risk, but it doesn't mean it can't work. Penny Hardaway had never worked on a college campus before he got the Memphis job. And, I know it's been bumpy, but it's pretty solid right now. Coming off an NCAA tournament appearance and got another team that looks like it's going to make the NCAA tournament. So that's another name on the list. But ultimately, to wrap this all up, I think Rodney Terry will be the coaching Texas next season because, he has been. And this is a fascinating situation. This is true for Rodney. Imagine waking up with this on your plate. I'm going to coach for the next 3 months. And if I do this well, I'm probably going to make guaranteed $15 million. And if I don't, I'm going to go be an assistant coach somewhere for $300,000. That is Rodney Terry's life right now. All right. It's your job to lose. And if you knock this thing out of the park, I can lock you in guaranteed $15 million. I'm just throwing out a number, 5 years, $3 million a year. Right.
Yep.
But if you don't do it well, you're back to, making $300,000 a year. Who's got more on the line over the next 3 months than Rodney Terry? But like you pointed out, he has inherited a really talented, experienced team from Chris Beard and just got to keep it between the lines. Now the Big 12 can eat you up. You gotta do the job. Just having good players ain't good enough because most teams have good players. But if he does this job well enough, and I think that he will, I think Rodney Terry, raised in Texas, spent a decade or so on Rick Barnes' staff at Texas. He knows his surroundings. He's comfortable in his surroundings. He's well liked. I don't know if you know Rodney, but I've known Rodney for somewhere between 15 and 20 years. Great guy. I mean, just like the best in terms of easy to get along with, easy to talk to. I'm sure he has allies on that campus within that athletic department. And if he does well enough, and I think that he will, I think he'll have the opportunity to keep that job.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's probably the favorite at this point, so long as he, like you said, could keep it between the lines. And Texas makes a run this season, would put him as the front runner to win that job. A couple that you mentioned in your column that I will just highlight as well. We talked about all of them actually. Jerome Tang was the final one.
I'm glad you brought that up. Go ahead.
He was the one that you hadn't mentioned yet. I really like that one. Obviously, he just took over his first program as a head coach at Kansas State after serving 19 seasons at Baylor as kind of Scott Drew's right-hand man, lieutenant. Dude can clearly coach. I mean, Kansas State has been pretty mediocre, kind of middle to bottom feeder in the Big 12 for a really long time. Kansas State's 13-1 to start the year. He seems to just sometimes you just know when a coach just has it, and it seems like he has it. You highlighted obviously like the chances of, or the likelihood that any coach goes to one program and just goes and leaves after 1 year is not likely. And I'd be kind of surprised if Jerome Tang took the Kansas State job and then just left. But Texas is a job where you leave for after 1 year if it's available to you.
Yeah, let's just stop there for a second. Because a couple of points. First off, it is not normal to take a job and leave 1 year later. But if the job you have is the Kansas State job and the job you get offered is the Texas job, well, then you leave after 1 year. Yeah. I don't know that Jerome Tang would ever be offered the Kansas job. The Texas job. Right. I can't imagine he would be offered the Texas job and not take the Texas job. And I had some people last night when I put Jerome on the list say, come on, he's coached a half a season. Let's slow it down. Well, can I remind you that Arizona hired a coach who had never been a head coach? That's the Arizona basketball. Hired somebody who had never been a head coach, and that's going brilliantly. Yeah. So, Jerome was working in the state of Texas for nearly 20 years, side by side with Scott Drew. He knows what winning in the Big 12 looks like. He helped build that program from nothing into a actual national champion. And if he continues to do well this year at Kansas State, I could, and Rodney Terry falls short of expectations and the job actually opens, I would be, I think Jerome Tang would have to be somebody you'd be interested in if you're at the University of Texas. I'm sort of looking through the YouTube comments here, and the name Rick Pitino comes up. Let me just say this. I think Rick Pitino is amazing. I think Rick Pitino is going to coach at the high major level again. If I were St. John's and my job opened up, I would offer it to Rick Pitino. I'm not sure at the University of Texas, when you just fired a coach because of a personal life scandal, I don't know that you can hire another coach who has had personal life scandals. And I know Rick's story is vastly different than Chris Beard's story. I'm not comparing the two other than putting them under the umbrella of personal life scandals. And I just don't think if you're Texas, you can go down that path right now.
Yeah, I think that's right. Two more I will add to this candidates list that you did not include in your column. Not sure how realistic they are, but TJ Otzelberger turned a 2-22 Iowa State program into a tournament team in his first year. They won 22 games, advanced to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Iowa State is surprising 11-2 to start the year. A lot of sample size that Otzelberger is a really, really good basketball coach. He was really good at South Dakota State. Obviously, that's why he won the Iowa State gig. And so far, Iowa State, I don't think anyone expected they'd be 11-2 to start the year, but they look like they're not dropping off from last season and on track to, again, make the NCAA tournament. And then the second one, which I think is probably less realistic than Otzelberger and maybe by a lot, Dan Hurley. He's done really well for himself at the UConn job, turned the Huskies around in a hurry. They were a tourney team the last two seasons. Obviously look like they could be a 2 or a 3 seed or maybe even a 1 seed if they figure things out. UConn isn't the same job that it once was early in the 2000s, and I think Texas is a better job with better resources. Now, would he leave UConn? I kind of doubt it. Would he fit culturally at Texas? I'm not entirely sure, but also, would it matter? Does it matter? I mean, if you're going to get paid double what you're making at UConn, maybe Dan Hurley takes a look there. That's kind of a long shot that I thought that could be interesting.
Yeah, I would, if I were making a longer list, I would put those guys on it. Certainly I'd make a phone call to Dan. I mean, you'd be asking him to, this is a guy who is from up there, as they say, to go into the deep South, the heart of Texas. That's fine. You don't have to be defined by where you grew up or where you've worked. I think great basketball coaches work anywhere. You could take, if somebody's like circling back to John Calipari, like John Calipari has been super successful at UMass, so in New England, and also in Memphis, sort of in the middle of the SEC, certainly the South. And now, in Lexington, Kentucky as well. So I think great coaches can be great anywhere. That wouldn't concern me. But, I don't know that Dan would want to move to Texas. But, it's a lot of money and it's a great job. It'd certainly be worth a phone call. TJ Otzelberger's really good name. And another one is Nate Oates at Alabama. He makes a lot of money, big buyout, all that stuff. But I think Nate is terrific. He's really figured out how to modernize his style of play at Alabama and in ways that, frankly, other coaches haven't quite been able to figure out. And, if I'm not just removing the interim tag from Rodney Terry and handing him the job full time, and I'm putting a list together, Nate Oates would be on that list of people I would want to talk to. Also in the YouTube comments, Dennis Gates at Missouri. Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't, I know with Jerome Tang, you can say, yeah, first year at Kansas State, he's only coached half a season. With Dennis Gates, there is a track record of winning somewhere else. He was successful at Cleveland State, and now he's killing it at Missouri. So these are all reasonable candidates. We'll revisit it, I'm certain, at some point, but for now, if I had to handicap this thing, I would probably make Rodney Terry the leader to be Texas coach next season, strictly because he's already in position to get the job. He just has to not screw this up. And as long as he doesn't screw it up, I think he's the most likely guy, coaching game one in the 2023-24 season.
And the chaos hire would be Mark Adams, right? Texas just goes and hires Texas Tech's coach again, and then Texas Tech fans are
okay. I don't think Texas will hire Mark Adams, but oh boy. Yeah, that'd be fun on the internet.
Yes.
I don't know that that's realistic. In fact, I'd be shocked, but it would be fun. It'd be fun on the internet for sure. Let's move on.